denied her twins and walked away. 10 years later, she arrived at a luxury gala with their new dad. The Meridian Grand Ballroom hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Crystal chandeliers threw soft light across marble floors, and waiters glided between clusters of Seattle's elite carrying champagne flutes on silver trays. The annual Community Leadership Gala drew every notable name in the Pacific Northwest, and tonight's turnout confirmed what everyone already knew. This was where power mingled with philanthropy, where deals disguised as conversation happened over hors d'oeuvres. Amira Cray stepped through the entrance alongside Dayton Crosswell, her fingers resting lightly in the crook of his arm. She wore a midnight blue gown that moved like water, elegant without demanding attention. Behind them, Luna Cray carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned early that grace spoke louder than volume. Tyrese Cray, sharper than his 12 years suggested, scanned the room with the analytical eye he'd inherited from his mother. Heads turned. Not the slow, polite acknowledgement reserved for regular attendees, but the immediate, hungry attention given to those who mattered. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes tracked their movement across the threshold. Dayton Crosswell was the reason. His name carried weight that couldn't be bought, only earned through decades of strategic brilliance and an empire built on innovation rather than inheritance. Crosswell Technologies had reshaped 3 industries before most people learned how to navigate one. But tonight, he wasn't the center of his own orbit. He moved with Amira, matched her pace, his presence steady rather than commanding. At the podium near the stage, Lionel Price adjusted his microphone. The veteran MC had hosted this event for 12 consecutive years, and his voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who knew exactly how to work a room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lionel began, his tone smooth as aged bourbon, "we gather tonight to celebrate those among us who've transformed challenge into opportunity, who've lifted communities while building legacies. This year's honorees represent the best of what Seattle offers the world." Applause rippled through the ballroom. Amira felt the energy shift, felt the moment settle around her like a familiar coat. She'd been here before, not in this specific room, but in this space where achievement met recognition. After years of rebuilding, of transforming Cray Consulting from a struggling firm into a national force, these moments no longer intimidated her. They confirmed what she already knew about her own capacity. Luna leaned close. "Mom, table 7, front right." Amira followed her daughter's subtle gesture and spotted their assigned seating. "Prime placement," she noted. "Close enough to the stage to matter, positioned to be seen without appearing desperate for visibility." "Perfect," Amira murmured. "Tyrese, you good?" Her son nodded, already cataloguing faces he recognized from business journals and news features. "I count at least 4 Forbes regulars. This is higher caliber than the spring fundraiser." Dayton smiled, impressed as always by the young man's sharp observation. "You're not wrong. Senator Michaels just walked in. That's Harold Thompson from Pacific Ventures near the bar. And—" He stopped. Amira felt Dayton's arm tense beneath her fingertips, a microscopic shift that most wouldn't notice. But she'd learned to read him over the past year and understood the language of his restraint. She followed his eyeline and found him immediately. Reed Callahan stood near the Western Gallery entrance, frozen mid-conversation with a woman Amira didn't recognize. He looked older, not dramatically, but in the way men do when stress outpaces their years. His suit was expensive. His posture still carried that athletic confidence he'd always possessed. But something in his eyes had changed. They held a desperation that time and distance couldn't disguise. Their gazes locked across 30 feet of polished marble and milling guests. For Amira, the moment stretched and compressed simultaneously. She saw him and felt nothing. No surge of old anger, no residual pain, no complicated knot of unfinished business demanding resolution. Just recognition, simple and clean, like spotting an old classmate at a grocery store. For Reed, the impact was catastrophic. He'd known she might be here. He'd seen her name on the honoree list and told himself he was prepared, that 12 years provided enough distance to handle this encounter with maturity and grace. He'd rehearsed neutral greetings, practiced indifferent smiles, convinced himself the past had released its grip. He'd been wrong about everything. Seeing Amira now, successful, radiant, clearly thriving in ways that had nothing to do with him, shattered the careful narrative he'd constructed about their history. Worse, seeing her with Dayton Crosswell, seeing the easy intimacy between them, the way she fit naturally into spaces Reed had always dreamed of accessing, drove home a truth he'd spent years avoiding. She'd moved on, completely, decisively, into a life that dwarfed anything they'd built together. Reed moved before conscious thought caught up with intention. He crossed the ballroom floor with determination, weaving through clusters of conversation, his focus locked on Amira with an intensity that made nearby guests step aside instinctively. Dayton noticed him coming. His expression didn't change, no flash of territorial aggression, no defensive posturing. He simply stood still, his presence beside Amira steady and unmovable, letting her dictate how this moment would unfold. Luna and Tyrese recognized the shift in atmosphere. They moved closer to their mother, not protectively, but supportively. A unified front formed through years of facing challenges together. Reed stopped 3 feet away. Up close the changes were more apparent, fine lines around his eyes, a tightness in his jaw that suggested sleepless nights and difficult years. His hands flexed at his sides, opening and closing in a rhythm that betrayed his nerves. Amira. Her name came out rougher than he'd intended, carrying more weight than a simple greeting should hold. Amira met his gaze with the calm of someone who'd left this battlefield years ago. She didn't flinch, didn't retreat into Dayton's shadow, didn't need rescuing from a confrontation that held no power over her anymore. Reed, she acknowledged, her voice carrying the same neutral politeness she'd use with any acquaintance whose name she remembered, but whose relevance had expired. The simplicity of her response hit him harder than anger would have. Anger meant he still mattered enough to provoke emotion. This careful courtesy meant he'd been downgraded to background noise in her story. Reed's eyes shifted briefly to Dayton, then back to Amira. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight. I saw the honoree list, but I thought—" "You thought correctly," Amira interrupted, her tone remaining even. "I'm being honored tonight for the community mentorship program Cray Consulting launched last year." Pride flickered across Luna's face. Tyrese stood straighter, his young features reflecting the same quiet satisfaction his mother wore so naturally now. Reed absorbed this information like a physical blow. Of course she was being honored. Of course she'd built something worthy of recognition. The Amira he'd underestimated, the woman whose ambitions he'd treated as hobbies compared to his own career, had exceeded every limitation he'd tried to place on her potential. "That's— congratulations," Reed managed, the words scraping out awkwardly. "That's really impressive, Amira. I always knew you had it in you." Dayton's expression shifted microscopically. Not anger, something closer to bemused disbelief that this man actually thought he had standing to comment on Amira's capabilities. Amira registered the patronizing edge beneath Reed's compliment and felt a flicker of something sharp move through her chest. Not hurt, not even irritation, just a clean, clarifying awareness of how thoroughly she'd outgrown the man standing before her. "Thank you," she replied, offering nothing beyond basic courtesy. Reed shifted his weight, clearly struggling to navigate a conversation that wasn't following any script he'd prepared. His gaze moved to Luna and Tyrese, and something complicated crossed his features, regret mixed with loss, recognition tinged with shame. "Luna, Tyrese, you both look— you've grown so much." Luna's response was polite but distant. "Hello, Reed." Tyrese simply nodded, his face carefully neutral. Years ago, when the divorce was fresh and wounds were raw, he'd harbored fantasies of confronting his father, of delivering the speech about abandonment and broken promises that young boys rehearse in mirrors. But standing here now, seeing Reed diminished by his own choices, Tyrese found those old speeches unnecessary. His father had already delivered his own verdict through absence. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Around them, the gala continued its elegant rhythm. Laughter, conversation, the soft clink of glasses, Lionel Price's voice announcing the evening's agenda. But in their small circle, the weight of history created its own atmosphere. Reed opened his mouth, clearly searching for words that might bridge the canyon between past and present, between who they'd been and who they'd become. Before he could speak, Amira glanced at the stage where Lionel was gesturing toward the honorees' tables. The program was moving forward, which meant her speaking slot was approaching. She turned back to Reed with the decisive efficiency of someone who'd mastered time management long ago. "I'm about to speak. My presentation is scheduled in 20 minutes, and I need to review my notes and check in with the event coordinators." Reed's face fell, hope deflating visibly. "Right. Of course, I just thought we could—" After, Amira continued, her tone firm but not unkind. She was setting a boundary, not launching an attack. "If you want to talk, we can step outside after my presentation, but right now I have responsibilities that need my attention." The message was clear. He didn't get to disrupt her moment with his unscheduled need for closure or reconciliation or whatever he'd convinced himself this encounter might provide. Her priorities had shifted years ago, and he no longer ranked high enough to derail them. Dayton remained exactly where he was, his hand moving to rest lightly at Amira's shoulder, not possessive, not territorial, just present. His message was equally clear. She had support if she wanted it, space if she needed it, and he trusted her completely to handle this however she chose. Reed noticed the gesture. Notice the easy intimacy it represented. Notice how Dayton didn't feel the need to assert dominance or stake claims because his position in Amira's life was already secure. "After," Reed repeated, grasping at the concession like a lifeline. "Yes, that works. I'll be here." Amira nodded once, then turned toward her children. "Luna, Tyrese, let's get settled. I want to go over the slideshow transitions one more time." As they moved toward their table, Dayton fell into step beside them. He didn't look back at Reed, didn't acknowledge the other man's presence with so much as a glance. Reed Callahan simply wasn't significant enough to warrant his attention. Reed stood alone in the middle of the ballroom, watching Amira walk away from him for what felt like the 1,000th time. Except this version hurt worse than all the others combined, because this time she wasn't walking away in pain or anger. She was walking away because she had somewhere more important to be, and he was just an interruption she'd agreed to tolerate later. From the stage, Lionel Price's voice rang out with practiced enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. We're about to begin this evening's presentations, starting with a woman whose vision has changed countless lives across our community. Please welcome to the stage Amira Cray, founder and CEO of Cray Consulting." The ballroom erupted in applause. Amira smiled, squeezed Dayton's hand once, and walked toward her future. Reed remained frozen, trapped in a past that no longer had room for him. Before we continue with the next chapter, I want to take a moment to thank each of you who've helped this channel reach over 1,000 subscribers. Your support means everything. If this story is hitting home for you, share it with someone on line 3 of the comments, tag them, and let them know why you think they need to hear this. And if you're new here, welcome to Mr. Steel Rich Stories. Hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. 12 years earlier, the world felt smaller and infinitely more possible. Amira sat on the weathered bench beside the Duwamish River, her notebook balanced on her knees, pen moving rapidly across the page. She was 24, working double shifts at a downtown marketing firm while finishing her business degree at night. Her handwriting was cramped from fatigue, but her ideas sprawled across margins with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned to doubt herself. Reed dropped onto the bench beside her, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the corner shop that knew their orders by heart. He was 26, teaching history at Roosevelt High School and coaching junior varsity basketball. His students loved him. Parents praised him at conferences. He had the easy charm of someone who'd never faced a door that didn't open when he knocked. "Let me see," he said, leaning over to read her notes. Amira tilted the notebook toward him. "Community consulting model. Small businesses need strategy support but can't afford the big firms. We build a subscription service. Affordable monthly rates, rotating expertise, relationship-based rather than project-based." Reed studied her sketches, the flowcharts mapping client acquisition and service delivery. Ink smudged the side of her hand, a permanent condition during those years when she carried notebooks everywhere and captured ideas the moment they arrived. "You're going to build something incredible," Reed said, and he meant it. Back then he believed in her vision as much as she did. "When you launch this, I'll be your first investor." Amira laughed. "You're a teacher. You don't have investment capital." "I will. We will." Reed's arms circled her shoulders, pulling her close. "That's the plan, right? You build your consulting empire. I will become principal, maybe move into administration. We get the house with the good school district. We do this together." The river moved past them, indifferent to their dreams. Seagulls circled overhead. The city hummed with traffic and possibility. Amira leaned into Reed's warmth and let herself believe in the future they were sketching. She was young enough to think love and ambition could coexist without conflict. That partnership meant equal investment in each other's dreams. She didn't yet know that some men only support women's ambitions when they remain comfortably smaller than their own. She hadn't learned that we often translates to you compromise when pressure arrives. But that education was coming. The river kept flowing, carrying time forward whether they were ready or not. Amira discovered she was pregnant on a Thursday morning in March. 2 lines appeared on the test while she stood in the cramped bathroom of the apartment she and Reed shared in Ballard. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fear and joy mixing into something she couldn't name. When she told Reed that evening, his face cycled through shock, disbelief, then genuine happiness. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in the narrow kitchen until they were both dizzy and laughing. "Twins," the ultrasound technician confirmed 6 weeks later, pointing to 2 distinct shapes on the grainy monitor. "Congratulations." Reed gripped Amira's hand so tightly she felt her bones compress, but he was smiling. At that moment, he was all in. The complications started slowly, like weather systems forming far offshore before anyone noticed the gathering storm. Margaret Holloway entered their lives at a foundation fundraiser Reed attended for his school. She was old Seattle money, the kind that came with historical plaques and museum wings bearing family names. Her foundation funded education initiatives across the Pacific Northwest, and she'd taken an interest in Reed's work with underserved student populations. "You have potential," Margaret told him over wine at a reception where Amira felt underdressed despite her best efforts. "Real potential. The foundation is always looking for young leaders to mentor." Reed glowed under her attention. Amira watched him transform in Margaret's orbit, saw him straighten and sharpen, saw ambition she hadn't known lived in him, and woke up hungry. Margaret's interest came with expectations, though she never stated them directly. She mentioned conferences Reed should attend, programs he should apply for, connections he should cultivate. Each suggestion carried an implicit message about the kind of life and partner that fit her world. When Amira's pregnancy became visible, Margaret's warmth cooled by degrees. "Twins," she repeated when Reed mentioned it, her tone careful. "That's significant. Have you thought about timing?" "There are options, of course. Good doctors, quiet arrangements, no judgment, just practical considerations. She dressed her meaning in concern, wrapped fear in the language of prudence. She never said you're too young, or this will derail your trajectory, or that woman will hold you back. She didn't have to. The suggestions planted themselves in Reed's mind like invasive seeds, waiting for the right conditions to grow. The conversation happened on the porch of their Ballard apartment on a June evening when Amira was 5 months pregnant. The twins were active, their movements visible beneath her shirt when she sat still. She'd started assembling the second-hand cribs they'd found at a consignment shop, her body awkward but determined. Reed came home late from a foundation dinner. He smelled like expensive wine and cologne that wasn't his usual brand. He sat on the porch steps, not looking at Amira, his shoulders carrying tension she'd never seen before. "I need time," he said finally. Amira set down the Allen wrench she'd been using. Time for what? To think. To figure out if this is right. Reed's words came out rehearsed, like he'd practiced them during the drive home. "We're young, Amira, maybe too young for this, and I've been thinking, we should be sure." "Sure about what?" Amira's voice stayed level, but something cold was spreading through her chest. Reed finally looked at her, and she saw a stranger behind his eyes. "Sure they're mine." The world stopped. Amira heard her own breathing, heard traffic on the street below, heard a dog barking 3 houses down. But those sounds reached her from a great distance, filtered through the ringing in her ears. "What did you just say?" "I'm not accusing you," Reed continued, his tone reasonable, like he was presenting a logical argument to one of his students. "I'm just saying we should verify. Before we make life-altering decisions based on assumptions, it's the responsible thing to do. Responsible." He turned doubt into a virtue, dressed betrayal in the language of prudence. Amira stood, her movements slow and deliberate despite the twins' weight. She walked to the door of the apartment they'd shared for 2 years, the home where they'd planned futures and promised forever. "Get out. Amira, be reasonable. Get out." Reed left that night with a duffel bag and his laptop. He said he'd be back in a few days, that they'd talk when emotions weren't running so high that she'd understand he was being practical. He didn't come back. One sentence had changed everything. Not the pregnancy, not the pressure, just 21 words that revealed who Reed Callahan actually was when his comfort was threatened. Amira locked the door behind him and didn't cry. She couldn't afford tears yet. She had cribs to assemble and a future to build alone. The money ran out faster than Amira anticipated. Her marketing firm's salary covered rent and groceries, but pregnancy complications forced her onto modified bed rest during her 7th month. Disability payments helped, but the gap between income and expenses widened daily. She lay in bed calculating and recalculating numbers that refused to cooperate, searching for solutions in math that had none. Mrs. Dawson from upstairs noticed first. She appeared at Amira's door with containers of soup and refused to leave until Amira ate. When she saw the apartment, clean but sparse, the cribs, still half assembled, the empty nursery waiting for resources Amira didn't have, she made phone calls. Help arrived in forms Amira never expected. The community church 3 blocks over sent volunteers who assembled furniture and installed the car seats Amira had bought at a steep discount. Mr. Patterson from the corner store started setting aside day-old bread and nearly expired produce, refusing payment with gruff insistence. The neighborhood knitted itself around her, building a net she hadn't known existed. "We take care of our own," Mrs. Dawson said simply, as if community were a given rather than a gift. Luna and Tyrese were born on a rainy October morning, 6 weeks before their due date. They were small but healthy, arriving with the determined energy that would define them both. Amira held them in the hospital room, one infant cradled in each arm, and felt something settle in her chest. Fear remained. Uncertainty remained. The overwhelming responsibility of raising 2 children alone in a city that devoured the unprepared remained. But underneath those realities, something harder had formed. "We're a team," Amira whispered to her sleeping children. "The 3 of us. We don't need anyone who doesn't need us back." It wasn't a promise born from bitterness. It was a statement of fact, a foundational truth she'd build everything else upon. Reed sent a card 2 weeks after the twins were born. No money, no apology, just a generic congratulations card with his signature and nothing else. Amira threw it away without reading it twice. She had more important things to focus on than men who chose convenience over character. Returning to work 3 months postpartum felt like running a marathon immediately after surgery. Amira's body hadn't fully recovered. Sleep was a luxury she accessed in 90-minute increments. Her brain operated in a fog of exhaustion that coffee barely penetrated. But she couldn't afford to slow down. The marketing firm accommodated her situation with the bare minimum required by law. 12 weeks unpaid leave, a lactation room that was actually a converted supply closet, flexibility as long as her work didn't suffer. Amira took what she could get and pushed harder. She worked during the twins' naps. She studied business development strategies while nursing. She made contacts during lunch breaks and built proposals after Luna and Tyrese finally fell asleep each night. The neighborhood that had supported her through pregnancy became her first consulting project. Mrs. Dawson mentioned that the community center was struggling with grant applications. The local church needed help organizing their after-school program to attract funding. Mr. Patterson wanted to expand his corner store, but didn't know how to approach banks for loans. Amira offered her expertise for free initially, building a portfolio while solving real problems for people who'd shown up when she needed them most. Results followed. The community center secured a 3-year grant. The church's program doubled in size. Mr. Patterson's store expansion happened ahead of schedule. Word spread through networks Amira hadn't known she was building. Phone calls came from other neighborhoods, other small organizations desperate for professional guidance they couldn't afford at market rates. Cray Consulting existed in concept before it existed on paper, built from necessity and sustained by the simple reality that Amira had become very good at solving problems nobody else wanted to address. The youth center idea emerged from watching Luna and Tyrese navigate a world that wasn't designed for children whose parents worked multiple jobs. Amira saw the gap everywhere. The hours between school dismissal and parent arrival when kids roamed streets or sat in libraries because they had nowhere safe to go. The lack of structured activities for families who couldn't afford music lessons or sports leagues. The absence of mentorship for bright children whose potential was invisible to systems that only noticed problems. She started small. A Saturday morning tutoring session in the community center basement. 5 kids showed up the first week, 12 the second. By month 3, she had a waiting list and volunteers offering their time. The program expanded organically. Homework help became career exploration. Career exploration became skill-building workshops. Local business owners started visiting to talk about their industries. College students volunteered as mentors. The basement operation moved into a dedicated space. Funding came from grants Amira wrote at midnight, from local businesses she convinced to sponsor specific programs, from fundraising events she organized with the meticulous attention to detail that was becoming her trademark. 3 years after the twins were born, the mayor's office recognized the South Seattle Youth Initiative as a model program. 5 years in, they were replicating the model in 3 other neighborhoods. By year 7, Amira was consulting with city agencies about scaling the approach citywide. Cray Consulting grew alongside the youth center work. What started as neighborhood problem-solving evolved into a firm that specialized in community-based solutions for organizations caught between mission and sustainability. Amira hired her first employee, then her second, then built a team of specialists who shared her conviction that profit and purpose weren't mutually exclusive. Luna and Tyrese grew up in conference rooms and community centers, doing homework at the edges of strategy sessions, learning that work meant solving problems that mattered. They absorbed lessons about resilience, not through speeches, but through watching their mother build something meaningful from circumstances that could have broken her. Through it all, one truth crystallized with absolute clarity: doubt disguised as responsibility was still just doubt. Reed had wrapped his abandonment in reasonable language, had framed his betrayal as prudence, and had convinced himself that questioning paternity was the mature choice. But maturity meant showing up. Responsibility meant staying. Love meant choosing someone even when choosing them was inconvenient. Amira learned to recognize the difference between genuine concern and cowardice dressed in cautious language. That education proved more valuable than any business degree. Some lessons only arrive through pain, but once learned, they become unshakable foundations. Amira met Dayton Croswell on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing particularly remarkable was supposed to happen. She was presenting a community development proposal to the Croswell Foundation's board, competing against 6 other organizations for grant funding that could sustain the youth center's expansion for 3 years. She'd prepared for weeks, rehearsed her pitch until Luna and Tyrese could recite it from memory, and arrived at the downtown office building with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her work was solid. Dayton sat at the far end of the conference table, silent through most of the presentation. He didn't perform engagement. No exaggerated nodding, no performative note-taking. He simply listened with the complete attention of someone who understood that listening was active work. When Amira finished, he asked 3 questions, not the softball inquiries designed to look thoughtful, but genuine challenges that probed the sustainability model and long-term scalability of her approach. She answered each one directly, without defensive padding or evasive pivots. 2 weeks later, the funding came through. Full amount 3-year commitment, with an invitation to present quarterly updates directly to Dayton rather than through the standard foundation channels. Their professional relationship grew slowly, built on results rather than chemistry. Dayton visited the youth center unannounced, not for photo opportunities, but to understand operations. He asked Luna and Tyrese about their experiences, treating their opinions as valid data rather than cute anecdotes from the founders' kids. He fixed things that wobbled, not metaphorically, but literally. During his second visit, he noticed the community center's front door sticking in its frame. The next week, a contractor appeared to repair it, paid for by Croswell Foundation's facilities budget. When the heating system failed in January, Dayton sent his building operations team before Amira finished describing the problem. Practical kindness, delivered without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. Help that solved problems, rather than creating debt. Luna noticed him first. "Mom, Mr. Croswell doesn't act like other rich people." Amira looked up from her laptop. "How do other rich people act? Like they're doing us a favor by being here. He acts like he's lucky we let him visit." It was an astute observation from a 9-year-old, and it was completely accurate. Dayton's relationship with Luna and Tyrese developed independently of his growing connection with Amira. He showed up. Not occasionally, not when convenient, but with the steady reliability of someone who understood that trust was built through repetition rather than grand gestures. When Tyrese mentioned struggling with a coding project for his computer science class, Dayton spent 3 Saturday mornings working through the logic problems with him. Not solving them for him, but asking questions that led Tyrese to his own solutions. When Luna's debate team made regionals, Dayton attended the competition. He sat in uncomfortable auditorium seats for 6 hours, watching rounds that meant nothing to him. personally, but everything to a 10-year-old girl who'd never had a father figure in the audience before. He remembered details. Luna's favorite Thai restaurant. Tyrese's preference for basketball over football despite Seattle's sports hierarchy. The twins' shared dislike of surprise parties but appreciation for small celebrations that acknowledged achievement without spectacle. Dayton never tried to replace what the twins had never had. He didn't position himself as the father Reed should have been. He simply showed up as himself, consistent, reliable, genuinely interested in their lives beyond their connection to their mother. Trust accumulated slowly, built from hundreds of small moments that proved his presence wasn't conditional or temporary. When Amira and Dayton's relationship shifted from professional respect to something deeper, Luna and Tyrese had already formed their own opinions. They'd watched him treat their mother as an equal partner rather than a project to manage. They'd seen him support her ambitions without needing to control or diminish them. The twins didn't need to be convinced that Dayton was safe. They'd already spent 2 years gathering evidence that confirmed what their instincts recognized immediately. This man understood that love was a verb, demonstrated through action rather than declared through words. The conversation happened on a Sunday morning in Dayton's kitchen, 6 months after he and Amira made their relationship official. Dayton was making pancakes, the only meal he'd truly mastered, while Luna set the table and Tyrese queued up a playlist. Amira was still sleeping, exhausted from a week of back-to-back client presentations. Luna approached the stove, her expression serious in the way that meant she'd been rehearsing this moment. "Can we ask you something?" Dayton flipped a pancake, then turned to give her his full attention. "Always. Would it be okay if we called you Dad?" Luna's voice was steady, but her hands twisted the dish towel she was holding. "Not all the time, maybe. Just when it feels right?" Tyrese stood frozen by the speaker, watching Dayton's reaction with the guarded hope of a 12-year-old who'd learned early that fathers were optional and often unreliable. Dayton set down the spatula. He crouched to Luna's eye level, then gestured for Tyrese to come closer. "You call me whatever feels true to you," he said quietly. "If that's Dad, I'm honored. If it's Dayton, that's perfect too. If it changes depending on the day or the situation, that's also fine. This isn't about what I need from you, it's about what feels right for you." Luna hugged him then, fierce and quick. Tyrese nodded, his throat working around words he wasn't ready to speak yet. The pancakes burned, none of them cared. Amira found them later, eating charred breakfast and laughing, and knew without asking that something fundamental had shifted. Family wasn't about biology. It was about choice, made daily, demonstrated through presence. The South Seattle Youth Initiative graduated from conference room concept to brick and mortar reality during the spring following Amira and Dayton's engagement. Carmen Velasquez came on board as program coordinator, bringing 15 years of non-profit operations experience and a network of community connections that transformed the center's reach overnight. She had the gift of translating vision into logistics, of turning Amira's strategic frameworks into daily programming that actually served the families who needed it. Under Carmen's coordination, the center expanded from after-school tutoring to comprehensive youth development. Career exploration programs connected high school students with professionals in fields they'd never considered accessible. Financial literacy workshops taught practical skills that schools overlooked. Mental health services addressed needs that families couldn't afford to meet privately. Sienna Park, a local artist whose murals had transformed blank walls across Seattle into community statements, volunteered to lead the center's arts programming. She brought supplies, recruited other artists, and created a space where creativity was treated as essential rather than supplemental. The center's walls began filling with student work, paintings, photographs, sculptures made from reclaimed materials, digital art printed, and mounted with the same respect given to professional gallery pieces. Jason Proctor, a software engineer who'd grown up in South Seattle before tech money changed the neighborhood's demographics, started championing student coding projects. He brought colleagues from his company to mentor, secured donations of refurbished computers, and built a pipeline between the center and internship opportunities that gave students practical experience before college. The youth center stopped being Amira's project and became a community ecosystem, sustained by people who recognized that investing in young people wasn't charity, it was infrastructure. The building itself transformed from a rented space into a permanent facility, purchased through foundation grants and a capital campaign that Amira ran with the precision she'd honed over years of turning limited resources into lasting impact. The invitation to the Community Leadership Gala arrived in March, 8 months before the actual event. Amira opened the heavy cardstock envelope at the kitchen table while Dayton reviewed quarterly reports and the twins finished homework. The gold embossing caught the light as she read the formal language announcing her selection as an honoree. "Mom, that's huge," Tyree said, reading over her shoulder. Luna was already calculating. "You'll need a new dress, and we should come. This isn't something you do alone." Dayton looked up from his laptop, smiling. "Agreed. This is a family occasion." The months between invitation and event passed in the controlled chaos that defined their household. Amira refined her presentation, balancing statistics with stories that illustrated the youth center's impact. She practiced in front of her family, accepting their feedback without ego. This wasn't just recognition for work accomplished. It was validation that community-based solutions could compete with corporate models, that purpose and profit weren't mutually exclusive, that a single mother who'd started with nothing could build something that mattered. The night before the gala, Luna slipped a folded note under Amira's bedroom door. Amira found it while packing her speech notes. Luna's handwriting covered the page, neater than usual, like she'd taken time with each word. "Mom, tomorrow when you're on that stage, remember that you built all of this while building us. You made a family and a legacy at the same time. We're so proud of you. Luna." Amira pressed the note to her chest, breathing through the tightness in her throat. Tyrese knocked softly, then entered carrying his laptop. "I made something for your presentation. Slideshow of the center's growth. Photos from the beginning until now. I thought it might help people see the journey." He'd spent weeks on it, she realized, looking at the polished transitions and carefully selected images. Her children had been watching, absorbing not just what she built, but how she built it. They'd learned that work mattered when it served people, that success meant community impact, not just personal achievement. Reed Callahan's name appeared on the donor list for the gala's arts wing renovation. Amira noticed it while reviewing the event program 3 weeks before the evening. His company, Callahan Educational Consulting, had contributed $15,000, enough to earn prominent recognition in the printed materials. No personal note accompanied the donation, no attempt to contact her directly, just a corporate check processed through standard channels, his signature reduced to a scanned image on official letterhead. It was typical Reed, she thought, contributing enough to be visible, to claim association with success, while maintaining careful distance from any actual relationship or accountability. He wanted credit for supporting the work without doing the work of repair. Amira filed the program away and returned to focusing on what actually mattered. She had no way of knowing that Reed's trajectory had shifted, that Margaret Holloway's foundation had discarded him years ago when he proved less malleable than she'd hoped, that his donation represented genuine regret rather than performative gesture. Some context would only arrive later. The morning of the gala, Amira woke early. Dayton was already awake, reading beside her in the pre-dawn quiet. He set his book aside when she stirred. "Nervous?" he asked. "No," Amira said, surprised to find it true. Ready. She'd spent years building toward moments like this, not for the recognition, but for what the recognition represented. Proof that the work mattered. Evidence that starting from nothing didn't determine where you'd end up. Luna and Tyrese appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas, carrying coffee they'd attempted to make. "Family breakfast before the big day," Luna announced. They gathered in the kitchen, talking and laughing, building the foundation that mattered most. Later, as Amira reviewed her presentation one final time, she thought about the journey that brought her here, from a one-bedroom apartment in Ballard, with 2 newborns and no clear path forward, to this, a family that chose each other daily, work that transformed communities, a life built on purpose rather than accident. Reed's absence had forced her to become someone she might never have discovered if he'd stayed. She didn't thank him for leaving, but she recognized that his departure had created space for something better to grow. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. If you were Amira, would you meet Reed after your speech tonight, or schedule it for another day? Why? What would you say to him? And if this story is resonating with you, hit that like button and subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories. We're building something special here, and you're part of it. Let's keep going. The stage lights were warmer than Amira expected, wrapping her in a glow that felt both exposing and protective. She stood at the podium, looking out over the ballroom filled with Seattle's most influential figures, and felt utterly calm. Lionel Price's introduction had been generous, listing her accomplishments with the reverence reserved for people who transformed abstract ideas into concrete change. The applause was still fading as Amira adjusted the microphone and let the silence settle. 12 years ago, she began, her voice steady and clear, I was a single mother with newborn twins, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Ballard, trying to figure out how to keep the lights on and the formula stocked. I had a business degree, some marketing experience, and absolutely no idea how I was going to raise 2 children alone in one of the most expensive cities in America. She paused, letting the honesty land. This wasn't the polished origin story that donors usually heard at events like this. This was the truth, offered without apology or embellishment. The neighborhood I lived in saved us. Mrs. Dawson from upstairs brought soup and refused to leave until I ate it. Mr. Patterson from the corner store set aside food he couldn't sell and pretended it was good business sense. The community church 3 blocks over sent volunteers who assembled cribs and installed car seats because I was too exhausted and too broke to do it myself. Amira's gaze moved across the room, making eye contact with individuals rather than addressing an anonymous crowd. She saw Carmen Velasquez at table 12, Sienna Park near the back, Jason Proctor with his tech colleagues clustered by the Western Gallery. They taught me something fundamental. Community isn't what happens when you have extra resources to share. Community is what you build when you have nothing except each other. It's the decision to show up for people who can't pay you back, to invest in futures you won't personally benefit from, to believe that someone else's children matter as much as your own. She clicked to the first slide, Tyrese's carefully constructed presentation. The image showed the youth center in its earliest days, a basement room with folding chairs and borrowed books, 5 kids doing homework at a table meant for 4. The South Seattle Youth Initiative started in this room. We had no budget, no strategic plan, no feasibility study. We had a need, and we had people willing to meet it. The slides advanced, showing the center's growth through images that captured transformation. More kids, better space, expanded programming, students in college acceptance photos, holding scholarships that change trajectories. What we've built isn't measured in square footage or annual budgets. Amira continued, her voice carrying the weight of years spent proving this truth. It's measured in how many kids know they matter, how many families have support when a crisis hits, how much love the walls can hold. She let that sentence rest in the air, watching it settle over the audience. Square footage is just construction. But love is infrastructure. It's the foundation everything else gets built on. And when you build with love, what you create lasts. The applause began before she finished, building into a standing ovation that swept through the ballroom like a wave. Amira descended the stage steps to find her family waiting. Luna hugged her fiercely. Tyrese's eyes were suspiciously bright, though he'd never admit to crying. Dayton kissed her temple and whispered, "Extraordinary," in a tone that suggested he meant the woman, not just the speech. Guests approached with congratulations and business cards, requests for follow-up conversations and partnership inquiries. Amira handled each interaction with practiced grace, present but aware that the evening held unfinished business waiting in the margins. She spotted Reed near the gallery entrance, exactly where she'd left him 90 minutes earlier. He'd stayed put, watching her moment from a distance, his expression difficult to read from across the crowded ballroom. Amira excused herself from a conversation with a foundation director and made her way toward him. Dayton followed at a respectful distance, close enough to provide support if needed, far enough to give her space to handle this herself. Reed straightened as she approached, his hands flexing at his sides in that nervous gesture she remembered from years ago. He looked older up close, worn down by choices he couldn't undo. That was... Reed started, then stopped, searching for words adequate to what he'd just witnessed. "You've built something incredible, Amira. Truly." "Thank you," Amira replied, her tone neutral and polite. Reed took a breath, gathering courage that should have arrived 12 years earlier. "The twins you mentioned in your speech, Luna and Tyrese." It wasn't a question yet, but the question lived in the space around the words. Amira waited, refusing to make this easier for him. "Are they?" Reed's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Are they mine?" The question he'd asked once before, wrapped in accusation and doubt, now arrived as something closer to desperate hope, as if the answer might grant him access to a story he'd walked away from. Amira held his gaze without flinching. "Yes, Luna and Tyrese are your biological children. They're 12 years old now. Smart, kind, resilient. They've built good lives despite your absence. Not because of anything you provided." She delivered the information clinically, stating facts without emotional padding. He'd asked a biological question. She gave a biological answer. Reed's face cycled through relief, grief, and something that might have been shame if he'd let himself feel it fully. His eyes searched hers, looking for permission or forgiveness, or some indication of where they stood. Amira offered neither. She simply waited for whatever came next. Reed didn't collapse into elaborate remorse. He didn't perform grief or stage dramatic repentance. He simply stood straighter, met Amira's eyes directly, and spoke with the plain honesty that should have defined him years ago. "I was wrong," Reed said quietly, "about everything. I questioned their paternity because I was scared, not because I had any real doubt. I left because Margaret Holloway convinced me I had a future that didn't include being a young father, and I was selfish enough to believe her." He paused, his jaw working as he pushed through discomfort toward truth. "I told myself I was being practical, that I was making the mature choice by stepping back. But I was just a coward. I abandoned you when you needed support. I abandoned them before they were even born. There's no version of that story where I'm anything except wrong." Amira listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. She'd imagined this apology countless times over the years, scripted it in her head during sleepless nights, assigned it emotional weight it might never actually carry. The real version was simpler than her imaginings. Less dramatic, but perhaps more genuine for its lack of performance. "I don't expect forgiveness," Reed continued. "I don't expect anything, actually. But you deserve to hear me say it plainly. I was wrong. You were right to shut the door on me. And what you've built, both the youth center and your family, is more than I ever deserved to be part of." Amira absorbed the apology, turning it over in her mind like an object she was examining for authenticity. It seemed genuine, limited certainly. Words couldn't undo years of absence, but honest in its acknowledgement. "I hear you," Amira said finally, "and I receive your apology as what it is, acknowledgement. Not absolution, not permission to re-enter our lives without consequence. Just acknowledge that you understand what you did." Reed nodded slowly, accepting the distinction. "If you want to talk more, actually talk, not just exchange apologies, we can meet for coffee," Amira offered. "Somewhere neutral. Somewhere we can have a real conversation about what happens next, if anything." "I'd like that," Reed said quickly. "Whenever it works for you, I'll make myself available." Dayton stepped forward then, not aggressively but with the quiet certainty of someone claiming space he'd earned rather than inherited. Reed noticed him properly for the first time, taking in the man who'd been standing beside Amira all evening. Recognition flickered across Reed's features. He knew who Dayton Croswell was, understood the weight that name carried in Seattle's business and philanthropic circles. "Reed Callahan," Dayton said, extending his hand in a gesture that was more civility than warmth. "Dayton Croswell." Reed shook his hand, the grip firm on both sides, neither man performing dominance or submission. "Before we go any further," Dayton continued, his tone even and measured, "I want to be clear about a few facts. I love Amira. I've asked her to marry me, and she said yes. I love Luna and Tyrese. They call me Dad because they chose to, not because I asked them to or because I'm trying to replace anyone." He wasn't threatening Reed or establishing territory. He was simply stating reality, naming the relationships that already existed before Reed reappeared. "I'm not standing between you and your children," Dayton said. "That's their choice to make, and Amira's choice to facilitate or not. But I am part of this family. That's not negotiable or temporary. So whatever relationship you build with Luna and Tyrese, it exists alongside the relationship they already have with me." Reed absorbed this information, his face carefully neutral. "I understand." "Good," Dayton replied. "Then we're clear. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a competition. It was boundary setting delivered without emotion or ego. Just a man protecting the family he'd built through years of consistent presence, making sure everyone understood the foundation before new construction began." Amira felt gratitude bloom in her chest. Dayton wasn't controlling the situation or speaking for her. He was simply making his own position clear, allowing her to navigate Reed's re-entry without having to defend or explain the life she'd already built. Luna and Tyrese had been watching from table 7, their attention divided between their mother's conversation and the dessert plates that had just been delivered. When Amira gestured them over, they exchanged a look that held an entire conversation. Luna's expression asked the question. Tyrese's slight nod provided the answer. They stood together and crossed the ballroom floor, their movements synchronized in the way twins develop when they've relied on each other their entire lives. Reed saw them approaching, and something in his chest compressed painfully. They were so much older than the infants he'd walked away from, so fully formed into people with their own features and mannerisms and presence. Luna had Amira's eyes and cheekbones, but her height and build came from Reed's family genetics. Tyrese had Reed's jawline and the same slightly crooked smile, but his steady, analytical gaze was pure Amira. They were equal parts, both parents and entirely themselves. And Reed felt the weight of everything he'd missed settle over him like physical pressure. Amira made the introduction simply. "Luna, Tyrese, this is Reed Callahan. Your biological father. Reed, these are my children. My children, not our children. The possessive was deliberate and accurate. Luna extended her hand first, her handshake firm and brief. Hello. Tyrese followed his sister's lead, equally polite and equally reserved. Reed struggled to find words that didn't sound rehearsed or inadequate. It's good to meet you both. Finally, properly. Tyrese studied him with the careful assessment of someone deciding whether trust was warranted. Mom mentioned you teach history. Do you still do that? I do, Reed answered, grateful for the concrete question. High school level. Mostly American history and government. Do you cover engineering history? Industrial Revolution? Development of technologies that changed infrastructure? Reed blinked, adjusting to the specificity. Some. Not as deeply as you're probably interested in. I like puzzles, Tyrese continued, his tone conversational but his eyes still measuring. Engineering problems, soldering circuits, building things that work. Do you do any of that? Not really, Reed admitted. That's not my skill set. Tyrese nodded, filing away the information without judgment. Just data collection. Luna took her turn, her approach more direct than her brother's technical inquiry. Do you know anything about astronomy? Reed searched his memory for relevant knowledge. Basic cosmology. I can identify major constellations. I've read some Stephen Hawking. Why? I want to study astrophysics, Luna said matter-of-factly. Dayton's been taking me to the observatory and helping me understand orbital mechanics. He says if I keep my grades up and develop a solid research question, I could have a real shot at scholarships. The message was subtle but clear. She already had support for her ambitions. Reed wasn't filling a gap. He was potentially adding to something already complete. That's impressive, Reed said honestly. Astrophysics is challenging. Takes serious math skills. I know, Luna replied. I'm good at math. She wasn't bragging. She was stating the fact the same way she might note her height or eye color. The conversation continued for another few minutes, careful and surface level. Reed answered their questions without trying to establish connection he hadn't earned, without claiming parental authority his absence had forfeited. Luna asked about his work. Tyrese inquired about his education. Both questions were polite, appropriate, and carefully distant, the kind of questions you'd ask a stranger at a networking event, not a parent you were meeting for the first time. Reed didn't push for more. He didn't try to force intimacy or manufacture bonding moments. He simply responded honestly, letting them control the pace and depth of engagement. When the conversation reached its natural conclusion, Luna and Tyrese excused themselves politely and returned to their table, leaving Reed standing with the acute awareness of everything he'd lost. 12 years of soccer games and science fairs and bedtime stories, 12 years of first words and lost teeth and quiet moments that accumulated into childhood. Gone, irretrievable, lost to choices he'd made when comfort mattered more than commitment. Amira watched her children walk away, pride and protectiveness mixing in her chest. They'd handled the encounter with remarkable grace, offering neither hostility nor premature forgiveness. They're extraordinary, Reed said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he was barely containing. They are, Amira agreed, and they've become extraordinary without you. Remember that, whatever happens next, it wasn't cruelty, it was context. A reminder that any relationship Reed built with Luna and Tyrese would be new construction, not renovation of something that had fallen into disrepair. There was no us to restore. There was only the possibility of starting from nothing and seeing what, if anything, could be built. I'll call you next week, Amira continued, pulling out her phone. We'll set up that coffee meeting. Until then, give Luna and Tyrese space. Don't try to contact them directly. Let this develop at their pace, not yours. Reed nodded, accepting the boundaries without protest. As Amira rejoined her family, Dayton's hand finding her shoulder, Luna leaning against her side, Tyrese showing her something on his phone. Reed understood with devastating clarity what he'd actually lost. Not just children, not just a relationship. He'd lost this belonging, the easy rhythm of people who knew each other completely, who'd weathered storms together, who'd built trust through years of showing up when showing up was hard. He'd traded that for Margaret Holloway's empty promises and professional opportunities that had evaporated when he proved less useful than she'd hoped. The foundation work had ended years ago. Margaret had moved on to younger protégés with fewer complications. Reed had lost everything and gained nothing. But standing here now, watching the family he'd abandoned thrive without him, he felt something shift. Not hope exactly. Hope seemed too ambitious. But possibility. The faint, fragile possibility that he might earn a place at the edges of their lives. That consistent presence over years might build something small but real. It wouldn't fix what he'd broken. It wouldn't erase 12 years of absence. But it might give Luna and Tyrese something they deserved, a father who finally understood that love was measured in presence, not promises. The cafe Amira chose was deliberately neutral, a third-wave coffee shop in Capitol Hill that neither of them had history with, far enough from both their professional circles to avoid accidental audiences. She arrived 10 minutes early, claimed a corner table with good sidelines and minimal foot traffic, and ordered a flat white she didn't particularly want. The ritual gave her hands something to do, her mind something to focus on besides the conversation ahead. Reed arrived exactly on time, which she noted as a small point in his favor. Punctuality suggested he was taking this seriously, treating her time as valuable rather than flexible around his convenience. He ordered black coffee and joined her at the table, settling into the chair across from her with visible nervousness. His hands wrapped around the cup, seeking warmth or stability or both. "Thank you for meeting me," Reed said. "I know you didn't have to." "I didn't," Amira agreed. "But Luna and Tyrese deserve the chance to make informed decisions about whether they want a relationship with you. I can't make that choice for them, but I can create conditions where it's possible if they choose it." She was establishing the framework immediately. This wasn't about Reed's redemption arc or Amira's forgiveness journey. This was about giving two 12-year-olds agency over their own family structure. "That's fair," Reed said. "More than fair, actually." Amira pulled out a notebook, the same kind she'd carried 12 years ago when they planned futures on the river bench, though Reed probably didn't remember that detail. She clicked her pen and met his eyes with the professional directness she'd honed over years of difficult client conversations. "Let's talk plainly," she said. "No performance, no defensive justifications, just honest conversation about what actually happened and what might be possible now. Can you do that?" Reed nodded. "Yes, I can do that." Reed didn't deflect or soften. He'd clearly spent the weeks since the gala preparing for this, stripping away the comfortable narratives he'd built to protect himself from the full weight of his choices. "I left because I was terrified," he said. "Not of fatherhood exactly, but of what fatherhood would cost me. Margaret Holloway had opened doors I didn't know existed. Foundation work, consulting opportunities, access to circles where a high school history teacher from a middle-class background doesn't usually get invited." He paused, making himself continue. She made it clear that those opportunities came with expectations, the right presentation, the right priorities, the right kind of life that didn't include being a young father to twins. She never said it directly, but the message was obvious. Choose the future she was offering, or choose you and the babies. "I convinced myself I was being responsible by questioning paternity," Reed continued, his voice steady but strained. "I dressed up my fear as prudence. I told myself that asking for a paternity test was the mature, rational thing to do before making life-altering commitments. But it wasn't about responsibility. It was about finding an excuse to walk away that didn't make me the villain in my own story." He met Amira's gaze directly, not flinching from what he saw there. "When you threw me out that night, I was relieved. I told myself you were being unreasonable, that you'd calm down and we'd talk rationally. But really, I was grateful you'd made the choice for me. I didn't have to be the one who actively abandoned you. I could blame your reaction instead of my question." Amira's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her posture, a microscopic relaxation that suggested his honesty was landing. "I stayed away because it was easier than facing what I'd done," Reed finished. Every month that passed made coming back harder. The guilt compounded. Eventually, staying gone felt like the only option, even though I knew it was wrong. I chose comfort over accountability. I chose my career over my children. And there's no version of that choice that isn't completely, fundamentally wrong. The cafe hummed with ambient noise around them, espresso machines hissing, conversations overlapping, music playing low. But at their corner table, the silence held weight. Amira wrote something in her notebook, her handwriting quick and precise. "Do you understand the harm you caused?" Amira asked, her tone clinical rather than accusatory. She was gathering information, not prosecuting a case. Reed nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to, though I'm sure I don't understand the full scope." "Then let me clarify," Amira said. She wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier, more familiar. She was simply stating facts that Reed needed to hear. "When you questioned their paternity, you told me my word meant nothing. You suggested I was either a liar or didn't know my own sexual history well enough to be certain. You reduced our entire relationship to something disposable based on fear you dressed up as reason." Reed's hands tightened around his coffee cup, but he didn't interrupt. "When you left," Amira continued, "you put the entire burden of pregnancy, birth, and raising 2 children on me alone, not because circumstances forced you apart, but because you chose your comfort over their existence. Luna and Tyrese grew up without a father, not because you died, or because distance made it impossible, but because you decided they weren't worth the inconvenience." She let that truth settle before continuing. "They've asked questions over the years. Why doesn't our dad want to know us? What did we do wrong? Are we not good enough? I've had to explain to children that their father's absence isn't their fault, while also not destroying whatever possibility might exist for future relationships. Do you understand how difficult that is? To protect them from the truth while not lying about it?" Reed's face had gone pale. "I never thought about it from their perspective. I was so focused on my own guilt that I didn't consider what my absence actually meant to them day by day." "That's the problem," Amira said quietly. "You've been centered in your own story the whole time. Even your guilt has been about you." 2 days after the coffee meeting, Amira called Reed with a proposal. "I've contacted a family therapist who specializes in complex reunification situations," she said without preamble. "Dr. Melissa Osei. She's worked with families navigating parental absence and re-entry. I think we need professional guidance to do this right." Reed agreed immediately, which Amira appreciated. He didn't argue that they could handle this themselves or suggest that therapy was excessive. He simply said yes and showed up to the appointment Amira scheduled. Dr. Osei's office was located in a converted craftsman house in Fremont, her waiting room decorated with the kind of intentional calm that suggested she understood the importance of the environment in difficult conversations. She was a woman in her late 50s, with silver-threaded hair pulled back from her face and an air of competent warmth that put people at ease without making them feel managed. "Let me start by establishing what we're doing here," Dr. Osei said once they'd settled into her office. "This isn't couples therapy. You're not trying to repair a romantic relationship. This is about creating a framework for potential co-parenting that centers the children's needs and protects everyone involved." She looked between Amira and Reed, making sure they both understood. "That means we proceed methodically," Dr. Osei continued. First, we establish clear documentation, paternity testing, not because there's genuine doubt, but because legal clarity protects the children's rights and removes any future ambiguity. Reed opened his mouth, probably to say the test wasn't necessary, but Dr. Osei raised a hand. I understand you may feel the test is redundant or even insulting given your previous question, she said. But this isn't about doubt. This is about creating legal documentation that serves Luna and Tyrese's interests, medical history, inheritance rights, custody arrangements if needed. The test protects them, not you. Reed nodded, accepting the distinction. Second, Dr. Osei said, we create a counselor-guided introduction process. Reed doesn't get unsupervised access to the children until we've established trust and consistency. Third, we let Luna and Tyrese set the pace. They decide how much contact they want and when they're ready for more. And fourth, we build in accountability measures. Reliability isn't optional, it's the foundation. Everything else depends on. Amira felt tension. She hadn't realized she was carrying ease slightly. This was exactly what she'd hoped for. Clear structure that protected her children while allowing possibility. The test results arrived via secure email 2 weeks later. Amira opened them alone in her home office, even though she knew what they'd say. The clinical language confirmed what had never actually been in question. Reed Callahan was the biological father of Luna Cray and Tyrese Cray. Probability of paternity 99.99%. She forwarded the results to Dr. Osei and Reed without comment. Reed called 20 minutes later. Amira let it go to voicemail, not ready to navigate his emotional response. His message was brief. Got the results. I know I'm sorry doesn't cover it, but I'm sorry anyway. I'll see you at Dr. Osei's office Thursday. What struck Amira most about the message was what it didn't contain. No dramatics, no excessive self-flagellation, no demands for immediate absolution or reassurance, just acknowledgement and confirmation of their next scheduled appointment. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Reed was sitting with reality rather than performing guilt, meeting the situation where it was, instead of where his emotions wanted it to be. When Dr. Osei's Thursday session arrived, Reed came prepared with questions about next steps, rather than speeches about his feelings. He'd clearly spent the week since receiving results focusing outward, rather than inward. I understand this doesn't change anything practically, Reed said. The results just confirm what Amira already told me, but having the documentation feels important, like we're building on facts instead of assumptions. Dr. Osei nodded approvingly. Exactly right. Facts create foundation. Now we build a framework. Dr. Osei laid out the initial structure with the precision of someone who'd guided families through this process many times. We start with scheduled, supervised contact, she explained. Once a week, 1 hour, in a neutral location. I recommend the youth center since Luna and Tyrese are already comfortable there, and it's naturally structured around activities rather than forced conversation. Reed pulled out his phone to add the commitment to his calendar immediately. What day works best? That's for Luna and Tyrese to decide, Dr. Osei corrected gently. You're fitting into their schedule, not the other way around. Amira will ask them what day and time causes the least disruption to their routines and commitments. Reed nodded, accepting the correction without defensiveness. The sessions will be activity-based initially, Dr. Osei continued. You're not sitting across a table trying to manufacture deep conversation. You're doing something together, working on a project, playing a game, helping with homework if they request it. You're building comfort through proximity and consistency, not forcing bonding. She handed Reed a printed document outlining the framework. You show up on time, every time. No cancellations except genuine emergencies, and those get communicated at least 24 hours in advance when possible. Reliability is everything. One missed session without valid reason, and we pause the process to reassess. What about holidays? Reed asked. Or birthdays? Eventually, if Luna and Tyrese choose to include you, Dr. Osei said. But not this year. You don't get to show up to their birthday party 5 months from now with gifts and expect them to be grateful. You earn the right to celebrate with them through months of consistent, reliable presence in the small moments first. The boundary was clear and non-negotiable. You don't try to buy their affection, Dr. Osei continued. No expensive gifts, no grand gestures designed to compensate for lost time. You bring yourself, your attention, and your consistency. That's what matters. Amira added her own boundary. And you don't speak negatively about me or our history to them. I won't poison them against you, and you don't try to rewrite history to make yourself look better. They're smart enough to draw their own conclusions as they get older. Agreed, Reed said immediately. Completely. Phone contact gets added after 6 weeks of successful in-person sessions, Dr. Osei said. Brief calls Luna and Tyrese initiate when they feel like it. You don't call them, they call you. Eventually that might shift, but early on they control the access. Reed wrote everything down, his handwriting cramped as he tried to capture every detail. Dr. Osei leaned forward, her expression serious. Reed, I need you to understand something crucial. Children who've experienced parental abandonment develop hypervigilance around reliability. Every promise you make, they'll be watching to see if you keep it. Every time you show up, they'll be surprised because their experience has taught them adults to leave. Reed met her gaze, absorbing the weight of what she was saying. You don't get the benefit of the doubt, Dr. Osei continued. You don't get credit for good intentions. You get evaluated based purely on behavior, on the gap between what you say and what you do. And if that gap exists, if you promise and don't deliver, if you commit and then bail, you confirm what their father's absence already taught them. They're not worth staying for. The words landed with force. So before you agree to this framework, Dr. Osei said, I need you to be absolutely certain you can maintain consistency. Because starting and stopping is worse than never starting at all. Can you commit to that level of reliability? Reed nodded slowly. Yes, I can commit to that. Then let's begin, Dr. Osei said. Amira, Reed, and Dr. Osei spent the next hour building out details. Contact would begin the following week. Saturday afternoons, 2 to 3 p.m. at the youth center. Amira or Dayton would be present in the building, but not in the room, unless Luna or Tyrese requested it. Reed would arrive 15 minutes early to demonstrate reliability. He'd bring a suggested activity, but defer to whatever the twins wanted to do. He'd follow their lead on conversation topics. He'd leave when the hour ended, not pushing for extra time. After each session, he'd send Dr. Osei a brief summary of how it went, not his feelings, but observable facts about what happened. Luna and Tyrese would have separate check-ins with Dr. Osei to share their experience without pressure to protect anyone's feelings. The framework was clear, structured, and entirely focused on the children's well-being rather than Reed's redemption. It was professional, methodical, and designed to build trust through repetition rather than rely on emotion or hope. If turning apologies into plans feels like real growth to you, tap that like button so more people can find Mr. Steele-rich stories. And share this with someone who believes in second chances done right. Not the easy kind that skips accountability, but the hard kind that requires showing up consistently even when it's uncomfortable. We're building something real here, and your engagement helps others find these stories when they need them most. Reed arrived at the South Seattle Youth Initiative building at 1:45 p.m. on the first Saturday, exactly 15 minutes early as instructed. The building was different from what he'd expected. Not the gleaming corporate-funded facility he'd imagined, but a converted warehouse with character etched into every repurposed beam and community-painted mural. The space hummed with purposeful energy even on a weekend afternoon. Carmen Velasquez met him in the lobby, her handshake firm and her smile polite but measuring. She'd been briefed on the situation, understood exactly who Reed was and what he represented. "Ground rules," Carmen said without preamble. "You're here as a guest, not a parent with authority. Luna and Tyrese decide what happens during your hour. If they want to work on homework, you help if asked. If they want to shoot baskets in the gym, you participate. If they want to sit in silence and do their own thing while you're just present, you accept that." Reed nodded, absorbing each instruction. "You don't criticize how things are run here," Carmen continued. "You don't make suggestions about what we should be doing differently. You don't try to leverage your education credentials to position yourself as an expert. You follow my lead, you respect the space, and you remember that you're earning access, not claiming it." "Understood," Reed said quietly. Carmen studied him for another moment, then her expression softened microscopically. "The twins are in the makerspace. Third door on the left. They know you're coming. What happens from here is up to them." Reed walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoing on polished concrete floors. He passed rooms filled with students engaged in projects, mentors guiding discussions, the organized chaos of young people building futures. He found Luna and Tyrese at a workbench covered with circuit boards and soldering equipment, their attention focused on a project he didn't immediately understand. Reed knocked on the open door frame. "Hey!" They looked up. Neither smiled, but neither looked away either. "Hey," Luna replied, progress measured in single syllables. The first 4 sessions followed similar patterns. Reed showed up early. He waited in designated spaces. He let Luna and Tyrese control the agenda. Some weeks they engaged him directly, asking him to help search for information, requesting his opinion on a debate topic Luna was researching, letting him observe while Tyrese explained the engineering principles behind a robotics project. Other weeks, Reed's presence was largely ornamental. He sat nearby while the twins worked independently, available but not intrusive. He learned to read their signals, when they wanted space, when questions were welcome, when silence was the most respectful option. Carmen watched these early interactions with the careful attention of someone protecting children she cared about. She intervened when Reed's teacher instincts kicked in, and he started to correct rather than guide. She redirected when he began offering unsolicited advice. She reminded him, gently but firmly, that his role here was presence, not instruction. "You're doing better," Carmen told him after the 5th session, her tone carrying cautious approval. "You're learning to listen instead of perform. That matters." Reed accepted the feedback without defensiveness. He was beginning to understand that rebuilding trust meant submitting to evaluation, accepting guidance from people who'd earned authority through consistency rather than biology. He started helping with youth center operations in small ways that had nothing to do with Luna and Tyrese. He arrived early to help Carmen set up for weekend programming. He stayed late to help break down equipment. He volunteered for the unglamorous work, hauling supplies, organizing storage rooms, updating inventory spreadsheets. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply showing up for the community that had supported his children when he hadn't, demonstrating through action rather than words that he understood where actual value lived. Slowly, incrementally, the youth center staff stopped viewing him as an interloper and started accepting him as someone learning to contribute rather than consume. Sienna Park nodded to him when their paths crossed. Jason Proctor invited him to observe a coding workshop. Carmen started asking his opinion on logistics questions, treating his input as potentially valuable rather than automatically suspect. Reed was being absorbed into the ecosystem that had raised his children, earning membership through service rather than demanding it through entitlement. The middle school's spring STEAM fair happened on a Thursday evening in late April, 3 months into Reed's structured contact with the twins. The gymnasium had been transformed into an exhibition space. Student projects displayed on tables arranged in careful rows. Parents and community members wandered between displays, students explaining their work with varying degrees of confidence and enthusiasm. Amira and Dayton arrived together, navigating the crowd with the practiced ease of people who'd attended countless school events. Reed had been invited separately, not by Amira, but by Dr. Osei's suggestion that he begin appearing at public events where the twins might want support. He arrived alone, uncertain of his place in this environment, acutely aware that he was the newcomer in spaces where Dayton and Amira had years of established presence. Luna's project was near the center of the gym, a detailed analysis of light pollution's impact on urban astronomy, complete with data she'd collected from different Seattle neighborhoods and proposals for policy interventions. She stood beside her display board, explaining her methodology to a small cluster of interested adults. Her presentation was confident, thorough, and passionate. She'd clearly inherited Amira's gift for translating complex ideas into accessible language. Reed hung back at the edges, not wanting to intrude. He watched from a distance, feeling pride mixed with a sharp awareness of everything he'd missed. Years of school projects and science fairs, and moments of watching his children become remarkable people. Not a grand gesture, just a simple wave, an invitation to join the circle listening to her presentation. Reed moved forward, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that felt ridiculous for such a small moment. But it wasn't small. It was Luna choosing to include him, claiming him publicly as someone who belonged in her orbit. Tyrese's project was located 2 rows over, a functional prototype demonstrating sustainable water filtration using materials accessible in developing regions. Reed found him adjusting the display, fine-tuning the flow rate through his filtration system while explaining the design challenges to Henry Ortiz, a college engineering student who volunteered at the youth center and had helped mentor the project. Jason Proctor stood nearby, asking technical questions that pushed Tyrese to defend his design choices and explain his problem-solving process. The difficulty, Tyrese was explaining, is balancing filtration effectiveness with flow rate. If you filter too thoroughly, the water takes forever to process. If you prioritize speed, you compromise purity. Finding the optimal balance required testing 17 different configurations. His face was animated, his hands moving as he described the engineering challenges. This was Tyrese in his element, solving problems that mattered. Reed watched from a respectful distance, not wanting to interrupt the technical discussion. Tyrese glanced up, noticed him, and hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "Reed, can you look at something?" It was the first time Tyrese had directly requested his help outside their structured Saturday sessions. Reed approached the table. "What do you need?" Tyrese pointed to a graph mounted on his display board. "The axis labels keep peeling at the corners. I used double-sided tape, but it's not holding properly. Do you know a better way to mount them?" It was a small problem, almost trivial, but Tyrese was asking Reed to solve it, trusting him with a piece of work that mattered. "Let me see what we can do," Reed said, examining the display. "I think if we reinforce the corners with clear packaging tape, it'll hold without being visible. Want to try that?" Tyrese nodded. "Yeah, that should work." They fixed the issue together, working in companionable silence while Henry and Jason continued their conversation nearby. When they finished, the graphs were secure and the display looked professional. "Thanks," Tyrese said simply. "Any time," Reed replied, meaning it completely. The call came during the 4th period on a Tuesday afternoon 2 weeks after the STEAM fair. Reed was teaching the reconstruction era to his junior class when his phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. He normally silenced his phone completely during instruction, but since beginning contact with Luna and Tyrese, he'd kept it on vibrate, with their school listed as an emergency contact. He glanced at the screen. Roosevelt Middle School. "Take 5 minutes for the reading," Reed told his class, stepping into the hallway to answer. "Mr. Callahan? This is Bethany Kim, the nurse at Roosevelt Middle. I have Tyrese here. He had a mild allergic reaction to something in his lunch. Nothing serious, but we administered Benadryl and he's resting in the health office. We've been trying to reach his mother, but her phone is going straight to voicemail." Reed's training kicked in immediately. Assess, don't panic, get information. What was his reaction? What symptoms? Hives on his neck and arms, some throat itchiness, no respiratory distress, no swelling. He's responding well to the antihistamine, but our policy requires a parent pickup for any medication administration. Are you able to come get him? Reed checked his watch. 40 minutes left in the period. I can be there in 20 minutes. I need to arrange coverage for my class. Is he stable? Completely stable, Nurse Kim assured him. He's alert, joking with me about missing his math test, but I do need someone here soon. I'm on my way, Reed said. He texted his department chair, arranged for the teacher next door to monitor both classes, grabbed his keys, and was in his car within 3 minutes. During the drive, his mind ran through protocols. Tyrese was stable. That was the most important thing. Nurse Kim had handled it competently. Reed's job was to be present, calm and supportive without creating drama. He texted Amira. Even though her phone was apparently off, Tyrese had a mild allergic reaction at school. Nurse Kim gave Benadryl. He's stable. I'm picking him up. We'll text updates. Concise, factual. No unnecessary alarm. Reed arrived at Roosevelt Middle School 19 minutes after hanging up with Nurse Kim. The health office was exactly where he remembered from his own teaching experience. Down the main corridor, third door past the administration suite. He signed in at the front desk and was directed back immediately. Tyrese sat on the examination table, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal fading hives on his forearms. His face looked tired but not distressed. Nurse Kim sat nearby, documenting the incident on her computer. "Hey," Reed said, keeping his tone level and calm. "How are you feeling?" "Itchy," Tyrese replied, "but better than an hour ago. I think it was the peanut sauce on the spring rolls. I usually avoid peanuts, but the cafeteria labeled them wrong." Reed nodded, processing. "Makes sense. Nurse Kim said you're doing well with the Benadryl?" "Yeah, just tired now. That stuff always makes me sleepy." Reed turned to Nurse Kim. "What do I need to know for the next few hours? Any warning signs to watch for?" Nurse Kim appreciated his calm, practical approach. "The hives should continue fading. Drowsiness is normal. If he develops any breathing difficulty, facial swelling, or the hives worsen instead of improving, call 911 immediately. But honestly, I don't expect complications. This was a mild reaction, and he responded perfectly to treatment." She handed Reed a printed summary of the incident and care instructions. "I've been trying Ms. Cray's number," Nurse Kim added. Still no answer. "She's probably in a client meeting with her phone silenced," Reed said. "I'll keep trying and keep you updated." He sent Amira another text. "At school with Tyrese. He's stable and ready to go home. Hives are fading, no breathing issues. Taking him to my place to rest. Call when you can." Then he helped Tyrese gather his backpack and walk to the car, moving at the boy's pace without fussing. Reed's apartment was closer than Amira's house, and Tyrese was visibly exhausted from the Benadryl. "You can rest on the couch," Reed offered once they arrived. "I'll make some tea if you want it, or water, or you can just sleep." Tyrese chose sleep, collapsing onto Reed's couch with the boneless exhaustion of adolescence combined with antihistamines. Reed covered him with a blanket, set a glass of water on the coffee table within easy reach, and settled into the armchair nearby with a book. Not hovering, just present in case Tyrese needed anything. He texted Amira every 30 minutes with brief updates. 1:45, Tyrese asleep on the couch, breathing normally. Hives are almost gone. 2:15, still sleeping. The color looks good. No new symptoms. 2:45, starting to wake up, asking for water. Seems comfortable. At 3:10, his phone rang. Amira. "I just got your messages," she said, her voice tight with the controlled panic of a mother who'd been unreachable during her child's medical emergency. "Is he okay?" "He's fine," Reed said immediately. "Completely fine. Mild reaction, responded great to Benadryl, just sleeping it off now. Want to talk to him?" He handed the phone to Tyrese without making Amira ask. Tyrese was awake by then, still drowsy but clearly improving. He stood when his mother entered, accepting her fierce hug without the teenage resistance he might normally deploy. "I'm okay, Mom," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. It was scary for like 10 minutes, but then Nurse Kim handled it, and Reed came and it was fine. Amira looked at Reed over Tyrese's head, her expression complex, gratitude mixed with the discomfort of owing him something, relief mixed with residual fear. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being available, for staying calm, for the updates." "Of course," Reed replied. "That's what you're supposed to do." He gathered Tyrese's backpack and the care instructions from Nurse Kim, handing them to Amira without fanfare. "I'll see you Saturday," Reed said to Tyrese, stepping back to create space for mother and son to leave, without him inserting himself further into the moment. Tyrese nodded, already leaning into his mother's side as they headed toward the door. Reed watched them go, feeling something settle in his chest. Not pride exactly, but a quiet satisfaction that he'd done exactly what the moment required. No more, no less. The conversation happened 3 days later in Amira's car, after she picked up the twins from the youth center. Luna was scrolling through college prep materials on her phone, highlighting scholarships that matched her academic profile. Tyrese was sketching modifications to his water filtration design in a notebook balanced on his knees. "The allergic reaction thing was handled well," Luna said suddenly, not looking up from her screen. Amira glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror. Yeah. Reed didn't freak out. He just showed up and did what needed doing. Like Dayton would have." Tyrese looked up from his sketch. "Two dads is useful." The statement hung in the air, casual in delivery, monumental in meaning. Amira kept her eyes on the road, her hands steady on the wheel, even as her heart rate increased. "Yeah? How so?" "More places to learn," Tyrese said, returning to his drawing. "Like, Dayton knows coding and business stuff. Reed knows history and writing and how schools work. Different tools for different problems. It's just practical." Luna nodded her agreement. "And if one can't make it to something, the other probably can. Redundancy in support systems. Makes sense." They were applying engineering principles to family structure, finding logic in what could have been emotional chaos. It was so perfect that Amira had to suppress a smile. "That's a good way to think about it," she said carefully, not wanting to over-invest the moment with meaning they hadn't intended. "Yeah," Luna said, already moving on to the next scholarship application. But in the ordinary flow of afternoon conversation, something fundamental had shifted. Trust wasn't built through grand gestures or emotional declarations. It accumulated in small moments, showing up for allergic reactions, fixing display boards at science fairs, being present without demanding recognition. Reed was learning what Dayton had always known. Fatherhood was measured in inches, not miles, in consistency, not intensity. And slowly, incrementally, Luna and Tyrese were making space for him, in the structure they'd built without him. Not as the father who should have been there, as the father who was learning to show up now. Dr. Osei's office felt smaller, with 4 adults occupying the space usually reserved for 2. Amira sat in her customary chair, Dayton beside her with the quiet solidarity that had become their default arrangement. Reed took the seat across from them, and Dr. Osei positioned herself at the head of the configuration, creating a square rather than opposing sides. "We're here to build structure around the next phase," Dr. Osei began, her tone carrying the professional warmth that made difficult conversations navigable. "Reed's been showing up consistently for 4 months now. The twins have indicated they're comfortable increasing contact. But before we expand, we need to map out practical logistics that protect everyone involved." She pulled out a calendar, not digital but an actual printed 12-month wall calendar that she spread across the coffee table between them. Holidays, school breaks, family events. These are the high-stakes moments where unclear expectations create conflict and disappointment. So we're going to plan them explicitly, build a framework everyone understands, and create protocols for when circumstances require flexibility. Amira appreciated Dr. Osei's systematic approach. She'd spent years building organizational frameworks for businesses. Applying the same methodology to family structure made intuitive sense. "Luna and Tyrese will be 13 in October," Amira said, starting with the nearest major milestone. "That's in 5 months. Historically, we've done a small family celebration, dinner at their choice of restaurant, cake at home, a few gifts. Nothing elaborate." Dayton added context. "Last year they invited 3 friends from school, and we did an escape room followed by pizza. The year before was hiking at Mount Rainier. They prefer experiences over parties." Reed listened, absorbing information about traditions he hadn't been part of creating. His hands rested on his knees, his posture open rather than defensive. "For this year," Dr. Osei said, looking at Reed, "I'd recommend you not attend the primary celebration. You can acknowledge their birthday separately, maybe take them to lunch the weekend before or after, let them choose the activity. You're building your own traditions with them rather than inserting yourself into established ones." Reed nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I don't want to disrupt what already works for them." The holiday conversation required more negotiation. "Thanksgiving," Dr. Osei said, pointing to November on the calendar. "Historically, how does your family handle it?" "We usually host," Amira replied. "Mrs. Dawson from our old building comes, along with a rotating group of friends and youth center staff who don't have other plans. It's a community meal, not just immediate family." Dayton smiled at the memory. "Last year we had 17 people crammed into the dining room. Carmen brought her famous dessert. Jason attempted to deep fry a turkey and nearly set off the smoke alarm. Reed could attend that," Dr. Osei suggested. "In a group setting where he's one of many adults present, not positioned as immediate family. It lets Luna and Tyrese see him in a community context without forcing intimate family dynamics they may not be ready for." Amira considered, then looked at Dayton. His expression was open, unbothered by the prospect of Reed at their table. "I'm fine with that," Dayton said. "As long as Reed understands he's attending as a guest who happens to also be developing a relationship with the twins, not as a co-host or primary family member." "Understood," Reed said quietly. "I'm grateful for the invitation, whatever the capacity. Christmas required more careful calibration. We do Christmas morning at home," Amira explained. "Just the 4 of us. It's our tradition. Pajamas, homemade cinnamon rolls, opening presents slowly. It's an intimate and protected time." "Then Reed doesn't participate in Christmas morning," Dr. Osei said definitively. "That's your nuclear family space. Reed, you can celebrate with the twins separately, maybe Christmas Eve lunch or the weekend before Christmas. You build your own tradition that doesn't compete with or dilute theirs." Reed absorbed this boundary without protest. "What if I want to give them gifts?" "You can," Dr. Osei allowed. "But set a reasonable budget, say $50 per child. You're not compensating for lost time through expensive presents. You're acknowledging the holiday appropriately. Amira appreciated the specificity. Vague guidelines created space for misunderstanding. Clear numbers prevented resentment. Spring break, summer vacation, we'll map those out too, Dr. Osei continued, marking the calendar with different colored pens. The goal is that Luna and Tyrese know exactly what to expect. No surprises, no last-minute negotiations that put them in the middle of adult decision-making. Dayton raised a practical concern. What about activities that fall outside major holidays? School concerts, sports events, youth center showcases? There are dozens of small events throughout the year. The default assumption is that Amira and I attend, Dr. Osei said, gesturing to Dayton. You two are the established parental presence. Reed can attend if specifically invited by Luna or Tyrese, or if the event is explicitly public, like the STEAM fair where multiple community members are present anyway. She turned to Reed. You don't show up uninvited to things, even if they're technically public school events. If you want to attend something, you ask the twins first. You give them veto power without making them feel guilty for using it. Reed pulled out his phone to take notes. So I check in advance, accept their answer without pressure, and if they say no this time I don't take it personally or use it as leverage later. Exactly, Dr. Osei confirmed. And Amira, Dayton, you don't pressure them to include Reed if they're not ready. Their comfort is the priority, not managing adult feelings. Agreed, Amira said. The calendar is filled with notations, color-coded and specific. October, separate Reed celebration. November, Thanksgiving group meal, Reed invited. December 25th morning, Cray Crosswell family only. December 20th, Reed twins lunch and gift exchange. What emerged was a framework that honored existing family structure while creating deliberate space for new relationships to develop without forced intimacy. This will need adjusting as circumstances change, Dr. Osei noted. As Luna and Tyrese get older, their preferences will shift. As Reed's presence becomes more established, boundaries may expand or contract based on what's actually working. This isn't carved in stone. It's our best working model for right now. Amira felt tension she hadn't named begin to ease. Structure created safety. Clarity prevented conflict. The calendar represented thoughtfulness rather than rigidity, planning rather than control. The session ended after 90 minutes of detailed planning. Dayton excused himself to take a work call in the waiting room. Dr. Osei stepped out to give them privacy for final questions, a deliberate choice that created space for conversation she sensed was coming. Reed and Amira sat in the suddenly quiet office. The calendar spread between them like a map of a future they were building collaboratively rather than competing over. Amira nodded, her expression neutral but her attention fully present. I loved you, Reed said simply. 12 years ago, I loved you. I know saying that now sounds convenient or revisionist, but it's true. I loved you. And I broke something inside that love when I let fear override commitment. Amira didn't interrupt, didn't rush to reassure or reject. She just listened. I've spent years telling myself different stories about why I left, Reed continued. That we were too young, that the timing was wrong. Those circumstances forced my hand, but the truth is simpler and worse. I chose my comfort over your partnership. I chose a professional opportunity over our family. I chose the easier path, and that choice broke something that can't be repaired. He met her eyes directly, not flinching from what he saw there. I'm not here trying to reclaim what isn't mine, Reed said. I'm not harboring secret hopes that if I show up long enough, you'll remember what we had and want it back. You've built an extraordinary life with an extraordinary man. I see how Dayton loves you, how you love him. That's where you belong. Amira's expression remained composed, but something in her posture shifted slightly, a small release of defensive tension. "I'm here to parent well," Reed finished. "That's the only door I'm asking you to open. Not romance, not friendship beyond what CO parenting requires. Just the opportunity to be a good father to Luna and Tyrese, if they'll let me." Amira let the silence settle before responding, gathering her thoughts with the same precision she brought to difficult client conversations. "I appreciate your honesty," she said finally, "and I want to be equally clear about where I stand, so there's no ambiguity creating problems down the road." Reed nodded, inviting her directness. "What we had ended when you questioned their paternity," Amira said, her tone factual rather than accusatory, not because the question itself was unforgivable in isolation, but because of what it revealed about your character under pressure. When things got difficult, you looked for exits instead of solutions. You chose to doubt rather than trust. That's not a foundation you can build on. She paused, making sure he understood. "I don't hate you, Reed. I don't spend energy wishing you harm or hoping you fail, but I also don't love you, not anymore. What we had belongs to a version of me that doesn't exist now. The woman I've become was forged partly through surviving your absence, through learning to depend on myself and build community and raise children alone." Reed absorbed this without visible reaction, accepting truth he'd probably already known. "Dayton isn't a replacement for you," Amira continued. "He's not the man you should have been or could have been if you'd made different choices. He's his own person, and what we have is completely separate from what you and I had. It's not better or worse. It's just different, built on a different foundation with different people." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "So when you ask what door is open, it's this one. The door to parenting. The door to being a reliable, consistent, trustworthy presence in Luna and Tyrese's lives. That door is open enough for you to build a meaningful relationship with your children, to contribute to their well-being, to show up when they need you." Amira's voice carried absolute certainty. "But the door to us, to anything resembling what we had or could have had, that door is closed. Not locked with bitterness or sealed with anger. Just closed because what's behind it no longer exists. That's the door we're choosing, the one that serves our children without pretending history can be rewritten." Reed sat with her words, letting them land without rushing to respond or defend. Finally he nodded. "That's fair, more than fair, and honestly it's a relief to have it stated so clearly." Amira raised an eyebrow. "A relief?" "Yeah," Reed said. "Because ambiguity creates hope where hope isn't appropriate. If there was any possibility, even a remote one, that showing up might somehow lead back to romantic reconciliation, I'd be tempted to perform for that outcome. I'd be trying to be the man you'd want instead of just being a good father." He smiled slightly, self-aware and rueful. "Clarity lets me focus on what actually matters. I'm not here to win you back. I'm here to earn my children's trust. Those are completely different goals requiring completely different approaches." Amira felt unexpected respect for his self-awareness. He was learning to name his own tendencies towards self-deception, to recognize when his motivations were mixed, to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. "Then we understand each other," Amira said. "We do," Reed confirmed. The door opened, and Dayton returned, his presence shifting the energy in the room from intense to easeful. He read the atmosphere immediately and understood that something significant had been resolved. "Ready?" he asked Amira, extending his hand. She took it, standing with the easy grace of someone whose footing was secure. In the car on the drive home, Dayton reached across the center console and took Amira's hand. "How are you?" he asked simply. Amira laced her fingers through his, appreciating the question's lack of assumption. He wasn't asking what had been discussed, or whether she was okay with Reed's presence. He was checking in with her emotional state without demanding explanation. "Good," she said, finding it true. "Clearer. Reed and I named the boundaries explicitly, which removes the possibility of misunderstanding later." Dayton nodded, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. I'm glad. Clarity serves everyone. They drove in comfortable silence for several minutes before Amira spoke again. This doesn't change us. You know that, right? Dayton glanced at her, his expression gentle. I've never worried that it would. Reed being in the twins' lives doesn't diminish your role or your importance or your place in this family, Amira continued, needing to say it explicitly even though Dayton hadn't asked for reassurance. I know, Dayton said quietly. My security doesn't come from Luna and Tyrese not having other people who love them. It comes from knowing that what we've built together is solid, tested, and real. Reed's presence doesn't threaten that. If anything, it confirms it, because you're able to navigate his re-entry from a position of strength rather than fear. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not disappearing, Amira. I'm expanding to include without losing myself in the process. That's what love does when it's healthy. That evening, after Luna and Tyrese had gone to bed, Dayton and Amira sat on their back porch with mugs of tea cooling in their hands. Do you ever resent the complication? Amira asked. You signed up for me and the twins. You didn't sign up for navigating Reed's re-entry and co-parenting logistics and sharing space with someone who hurt us. Dayton considered the question seriously before answering. No, because the alternative, you preventing Reed from trying to repair things because it might be uncomfortable for me, that would actually bother me more. Amira looked at him, confused. Why? Because it would mean you were limiting Luna and Tyrese's possibilities to protect my comfort, Dayton explained. And that's not the kind of partnership we have. We don't protect each other at our children's expense. We support each other while doing what's right for the kids. He set down his mug and turned to face her fully. Reed being a good father to Luna and Tyrese doesn't make me less of a father to them. Love isn't finite. Family isn't a zero-sum game. They can have two fathers who show up in different ways, who offer different strengths, who love them from different positions. His certainty was absolute, unshaken by insecurity or competition. I'm their dad because I chose them, and they chose me, Dayton said. That doesn't change because their biological father is learning to show up too. Over the following weeks, the calendar Dr. Osei had helped them build transformed from theoretical framework into lived reality. Reed showed up for his scheduled time with Luna and Tyrese, sometimes at the youth center, sometimes for specific activities they'd requested, always on time and always prepared to follow their lead. He attended Tyrese's robotics competition when specifically invited, sitting 3 rows behind Amira and Dayton, cheering appropriately but not claiming proximity he hadn't earned. He took Luna to the observatory on a Saturday afternoon, letting her explain orbital mechanics and stellar evolution with the patience of someone genuinely interested rather than performing parental duty. The relationship developed incrementally, built on consistency rather than intensity. There were no dramatic breakthroughs, no tearful reconciliations, no movie moments where music swelled and everyone hugged. Just the steady accumulation of reliability, showing up, following through, being present without demanding recognition. Repair wasn't a headline, it was a practice. Reed learned to read the twin signals, to recognize when they wanted engagement and when they needed space. He learned to celebrate their victories without claiming credit, to support their challenges without trying to solve everything for them. He learned that fatherhood wasn't about grand gestures or making up for lost time. It was about being available, being consistent, being trustworthy in small moments that accumulated into something meaningful. Slowly, carefully, a new family structure emerged, not replacing what existed, but expanding it, not erasing history, but building alongside it. Luna and Tyrese had 2 fathers now, each offering different strengths, each showing up in different ways. And somehow, against odds that would have seemed impossible a year earlier, it was actually working. The South Seattle Youth Initiative looked different a year after that first gala collision. The main corridor now featured a sprawling mural that stretched across 30 feet of previously blank wall, Luna's design, executed with Sienna Park's mentorship and the collaborative effort of 24 youth center students. The piece depicted Seattle's skyline transforming through seasons, each building rendered in different artistic styles that represented the neighborhood's cultural diversity. Luna stood near the mural's center panel, explaining her design choices to a group of younger students who were planning their own artistic contribution to the building. Her confidence had deepened over the past year, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned that her vision mattered. The challenge was balancing individual expression with cohesive composition, she was saying, gesturing to how different styles flowed into each other. Everyone who contributed had their own section, but we planned the transitions carefully so it reads as one piece instead of disconnected parts. Down the hall in the Maker Lab, Tyrese guided 2 middle schoolers through soldering techniques, his patience remarkable for a 13-year-old working with kids barely younger than himself. The key is steady hands and the right amount of heat, he explained, demonstrating the motion. Too much pressure and you damage the component. Too little and the connection won't hold. You're looking for that perfect middle ground. The younger students watched with intense concentration, mimicking his movements with the careful precision of people trying to get something exactly right. Carmen Velasquez observed from the doorway, her expression carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone watching seeds she'd planted grow into something substantial. The youth center had expanded twice in the past year. New programming, additional staff, a waiting list that confirmed the community need they were meeting. This was the ecosystem that had formed around Amira's original vision. Young people teaching younger people, skills transferring across generations, community building itself through daily practice rather than grand declarations. The Cray family's rhythm had settled into something real and unsentimental. Amira and Dayton continued their work, she expanding Cray Consulting into new markets, he managing Crosswell Foundation's growing portfolio. Luna and Tyrese navigated 8th grade with the complicated social dynamics that age brought, their foundation secure enough to weather typical adolescent challenges. And Reed showed up, not dramatically, not perfectly, but consistently. He'd become a familiar presence at the youth center, known to staff and students as someone reliable rather than someone performing reliability. The family had expanded to include him without requiring the original structure to collapse or compress. It was working because everyone involved had chosen function over fantasy, choosing to build what actually served the children rather than what resolved adult guilt or fulfilled adult needs. The Community Leadership Gala's second annual iteration carried echoes of the previous year, but the emotional resonance had shifted completely. The Meridian Grand Ballroom looked identical, same crystal chandeliers, same marble floors, same clusters of Seattle's elite, circulating with champagne and carefully calibrated conversation. Lionel Price stood at the podium with his practiced warmth, introducing this year's honorees with the smooth delivery of someone who perfected the art of public speaking. But when Amira entered this time, the configuration was different. She arrived with Dayton, their connection even more visible than the previous year, not because they were performing couplehood, but because another year of partnership had deepened the ease between them. Luna and Tyrese flanked them, both dressed in formal attire they'd chosen themselves, carrying themselves with the quiet confidence of young people who knew exactly where they belonged. Heads turned again, but this time the attention felt affirming rather than assessing. The Cray Crosswell family had become familiar to this crowd over the past year, regular attendees at philanthropic events, increasingly visible in Seattle's social infrastructure. Reed was already present, seated at table 11 with other community program directors and youth advocacy professionals. He'd been invited in his own capacity this year, recognized for the volunteer coordination work he'd taken on at the youth center alongside his teaching responsibilities. When he spotted Amira's family entering, he raised his hand in a simple wave, friendly, appropriate, comfortable in its distance. Not claiming connection he hadn't earned, not hiding from relationships that existed, just acknowledging people who mattered to him from a position that honored the boundaries they'd built together. Luna noticed and waved back. Tyrese nodded in Reed's direction, before returning his attention to the program he was reading. The interaction lasted maybe 5 seconds, completely unremarkable to anyone watching, monumentally significant in what it represented. A year ago, Reed's presence had been a disruption, an unwelcome collision with a past Amira had moved beyond. Now he was simply part of the landscape, not central, not intrusive, just present in a way that had become normal through consistency. Amira felt Dayton's hand at her shoulder, grounding and familiar. She looked up at him and smiled, then guided her family toward their assigned table, front and center, positioned for the recognition she'd earned through years of work that had nothing to do with anyone except the community she'd committed to serving. This year, she wasn't being honored for launching the youth center. She received an award for expanding it into a regional model, for creating frameworks that other cities were now adapting, for proving that community-based solutions could scale without losing their soul. The gala proceeded with elegant efficiency. Amira's presentation was sharper than the previous year, more data-driven, more confident in its claims about what worked and why. And when she stepped off the stage to thunderous applause, her family was waiting, all of them in their appropriate positions, celebrating her achievement without claiming it as their own. The dessert course arrived during the gala's final hour, an elaborate construction the catering team called Clouds of Seattle, meant to represent the city's famous overcast skies. The dessert was architecturally ambitious, layers of vanilla bean mousse suspended in spun sugar structures that looked impressive but were structurally questionable. The presentation was beautiful. The engineering was suspect. At the Cray Crosswell table, Luna examined her dessert with the analytical eye she brought to most physical phenomena. "This won't hold." "The weight distribution is off," Tyrese agreed, poking the spun sugar base experimentally. "Too much mass concentrated at the top without adequate support below." Dayton grinned. "Want to bet on whose collapses first?" "That's a terrible idea," Amira said, already pulling out her phone to record the inevitable destruction. "Obviously we're doing it." They made their predictions, Luna betting on structural failure within 30 seconds, Tyrese giving it 45, Dayton optimistically suggesting a full minute, Amira placing her money on immediate collapse. The first spoonful caused exactly what Luna had predicted. Catastrophic structural failure. The spun sugar dissolved on contact with the mousse, the careful architecture collapsing into delicious chaos. All 4 of them laughed, genuine, unself-conscious laughter that drew amused glances from neighboring tables. "Ambition without foundation," Luna declared, scooping up the wreckage. "Classic design flaw. Still tastes good though," Tyrese pointed out, already halfway through his destroyed dessert. It was a small moment, completely ordinary, the kind of family interaction that happened thousands of times in households everywhere. But it mattered precisely because it was ordinary, proof that they'd built something that functioned in daily life, not just in crisis or celebration. Across the room, Reed watched the interaction with complicated emotions he was learning to sit with rather than act on. Longing mixed with acceptance. Sadness mixed with genuine happiness that his children had this. The easy family rhythm he'd forfeited the right to participate in years ago. He was learning to celebrate what they had without centering his own absence in the story. Later, as the gala wound down and guests began filtering toward exits, Reed approached the Cray Crosswell table. Not dramatically, not with any agenda beyond basic courtesy. Just a simple acknowledgement as someone who'd been part of the room and wanted to offer congratulations before leaving. "Amira, congratulations on the award," Reed said, his tone warm but appropriate. "The expansion work you've done is genuinely impressive. Other cities are lucky to benefit from the model you built." "Thank you," Amira replied, accepting the compliment without excessive modesty or false humility. "It's been good work. Challenging but good." Reed nodded to Dayton. "Always good to see you." "Likewise," Dayton responded, his handshake firm and friendly. "To Luna and Tyrese, I'll see you both Saturday. Still planning to check out that new exhibit at the Science Center?" "Yeah," Tyrese confirmed. "The biomechanics one. I want to see the prosthetics display." "I'm in," Luna added, "but we need to leave by 3. I have debate prep." 3 o'clock departure, Reed confirmed, adding it to his phone immediately. "Got it." The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. No deep conversation, no emotional processing, no dramatic declarations. Just the ordinary logistics of people coordinating around shared commitments to children they all cared about. When Reed walked away, returning to his own table to collect his things, the moment dissolved into the evening without residue. The past no longer narrated the present. History existed, acknowledged and learned from, but it didn't control the current story they were writing together. They'd all chosen forward motion over backward dwelling, chosen function over feeling, chosen what served Luna and Tyrese over what satisfied adult emotional needs. And that choice, repeated daily in small moments, had created something sustainable. Some lessons only arrive through experience, but once learned, they transform everything that follows. Accountability is a love language, not the performative kind that announces itself loudly, but the quiet kind that shows up consistently, that follows through on commitments, that acknowledges harm without centering the guilt of the person who caused it. Reed's apology at the first gala mattered less than the year of consistent action that followed. Words established intention. Behavior proved character. Second chances don't rewind time or erase history. They rebuild from where things actually are, not from where we wish they were. Amira didn't give Reed his old life back. She gave him the opportunity to build a new relationship with his children based on who he was becoming rather than who he'd been. That required him to accept loss, to acknowledge that some doors close permanently, that some relationships end not because of hatred, but because the people involved have fundamentally changed. And perhaps most importantly, children measure trust in repeated ordinary inches, not in grand gestures or expensive gifts or dramatic pronouncements of love. In showing up on time, in remembering details, in being present without demanding recognition. Luna and Tyrese didn't forgive Reed because he apologized eloquently. They began trusting him because he demonstrated reliability through hundreds of small moments that proved he meant what he said. Repair is a practice, not a destination. There's no finish line where broken trust becomes fully restored, where damaged relationships return to their original state, where everyone agrees that enough time has passed and sufficient penance has been paid. Instead, repair happens in the continuous choice to show up, to be honest, to honor boundaries, to prioritize the hurt party's needs over the guilty party's comfort. Dr. Asay's framework mattered because it created structure for that practice. The calendar, the supervised sessions, the clear expectations. These weren't punitive measures designed to make Reed suffer. They were protective scaffolding that allowed relationships to develop safely. Dayton's security mattered because it modeled what healthy love looked like, confident enough to expand without feeling threatened, generous enough to include without demanding scarcity, and mature enough to recognize that children having multiple sources of support made them stronger, not more divided. And Amira's clarity mattered because she refused to confuse accountability with cruelty, refused to mistake boundaries for bitterness, refused to pretend that forgiveness meant forgetting or that moving forward required pretending the past didn't happen. What lasts isn't the structures that look impressive from a distance. Like those desert clouds, architecturally ambitious, visually beautiful, structurally unsound. They collapsed under the slightest pressure because they prioritized appearance over foundation. What lasts is the unglamorous work of building properly. Strong foundations, clear load-bearing walls, honest materials that do what they claim to do. In relationships, that means choosing consistency over intensity, choosing reliability over romance, choosing to show up in ordinary moments instead of only appearing for celebrations. It means being the person who remembers the small things, who follows through on commitments, who demonstrates love through action rather than declaration. Reed was learning this slowly, painfully, through the humbling process of earning back trust he'd shattered. Dayton had always known it, had built his entire relationship with Amira and the twins on this foundation. And Luna and Tyrese, young as they were, understood it instinctively. People who love you show up. Repeatedly. Reliably. Without needing applause for doing what love requires. A year and a half after that first gala collision, the Cray-Crosswell household had settled into rhythms that felt sustainable rather than fragile. Sunday mornings meant family breakfast. Dayton's pancakes, Amira's coffee, Luna and Tyrese arguing amiably about everything from astrophysics to the correct way to fold fitted sheets. Saturday afternoons alternated between youth center activities and Reed's scheduled time with the twins, the calendar Dr. Ozzie had helped them build, now integrated so thoroughly into their lives that it no longer felt like imposed structure. Holidays were navigated with the framework they'd established, adjusted when needed, conversations that required Dr. Ozzie's mediation, still boundaries that needed reinforcement, still feelings that required processing. But the foundation held, not because everyone involved was perfect, but because they'd all chosen to prioritize what actually mattered, two children who deserved stability, support, and the knowledge that the adults in their lives could be trusted to show up. The youth center continued growing. Amira's consulting firm expanded into 3 new markets. Dayton's foundation launched initiatives in 4 additional cities. Luna won a regional debate championship. Tyrese's water filtration design earned recognition at a national STEM competition. Reed taught history, coordinated volunteers, and showed up for his children with the consistent reliability that had transformed from aspiration into habit. And somehow, against odds that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier, they'd built something that worked. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, not free from the scars of history, but functional, sustainable, real. Family isn't defined by biology or legal documents or shared last names. It's defined by who shows up, who stays, who chooses love as a verb instead of just a feeling. And by that measure, Luna and Tyrese had more family than most people ever find. If this story moved you, I want to hear about it. Hit that like button right now. It helps more people find these stories when they need them most. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories if you haven't already, because we're building a community of people who believe in accountability over excuses, in repair over regret, in showing up even when it's hard. Drop a comment below with your biggest takeaway from this story. What landed for you? What will you carry forward into your own relationships? What truth hit differently than you expected? And share this video with someone who needs the reminder that second chances don't erase the past. They rebuild from where things actually are. We post new stories every week. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for being part of this community. Now go show up for the people who matter to you. consistently, reliably, without needing applause. That's where real love lives.